evil clowns you've seen in the movies, well, it came to life in this case.
When your mom was growing up, was she fascinated with clowns?
She was. She even painted pictures of them. My mother, Marlene Warren, was a beautiful person. She was loving, caring, kind.
On May 26, 1990, a woman answered her door in front of her 21-year-old son and saw a clown at the door handing her balloons and flowers.
That was the worst day of my life. We were eating breakfast. We saw the colors of the reflections through the glass. It looked like a clown costume. My mother opened the door and I heard, "How pretty." And I heard bang. I saw her fall, and I ran toward her as the clown was walking away, and I saw that she'd been shot in the face. At that moment, I felt my heart, my soul just rip out of my body.
What did you see on the clown's face?
Well, it was a white face, nose, orangish red hair, and it was just a clown suit.
What does the clown do?
Calmly walks right back to the car, like nothing happened.
A person disguised as a clown walked up to Marlene Warren's Aero Club home in Wellington and shot her in the mouth.
I was working as a prosecutor here in this office when it happened, and it was big news.
Meanwhile, at her home, investigators gather evidence searching for clues.
Killing with a great costume to conceal one's identity. And anybody passing by would probably say, "Oh, isn't that nice? Somebody's getting flowers." It wouldn't be suspicious, and it would certainly make for the perfect crime.
Marlene Warren was someone without any known enemies, someone who cared deeply about her family, and they lived in a home in a pretty secluded part of Palm Beach County.
Michael Warren was married to Marlene Warren. Michael was a local businessman in the car business. The Warrens' marriage seemed to be an ideal marriage, but for the people on the inside that knew better, Marlene was expressing issues with Michael Warren. The people closest to Michael Warren that worked with him knew there was something wrong because they were observing Michael Warren's interactions with a woman by the name of Sheila Keen.
And the rumors was what about Sheila and Mike?
Well, it was more than a rumor that Sheila Keen and Michael Warren were having an affair. It was not hidden from any of the employees.
In the hours after the murder of Marlene Warren, the suspects became clear it was Sheila Keen and was Michael Warren, but Michael Warren had an alibi. Michael and Sheila thought that they could get away with anything.
It took over 30 years to make sense of it all.
This house was the scene of a bizarre murder.
That shooter, a clown, carrying flowers and balloons.
It's easy to see why this case has so much interest. Who isn't afraid of a killer clown?
The 1990 murder of Marlene Warren, shot by someone dressed as a clown, haunted not just the public, but the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office. Despite identifying 2 suspects, the case for decades went unsolved. Dave Ehrenberg is the current state attorney.
This was an assassination. This was not a random act of violence. This was not a robbery.
The unknowingness of this heinous crime, the fear, it was hell.
Joe Aarons was 21, living at home with his stepfather Mike and his mother Marlene when she was murdered.
She was a good mother. Everything she did, she took pride in.
The morning of May 26, 1990, had started as a cheerful one. Joe, recuperating from a broken leg, was having breakfast at home with his mom and 3 friends when they saw a clown approaching, carrying balloons and flowers.
And we kind of figured I had a cast on. Somebody was sending to heal and for gesture.
This is like, oh, what a delightful gift to cheer you up with your broken leg, right?
My mother opened the door, and then we heard bang, and she fell. At that point, we knew something was wrong. My mother was struggling to breathe, and then I jumped to the phone. Called 911 right away.
As the clown slowly and silently walked to a car, Joe and some of his friends tried to get a closer look at anything that might help describe the disguised attacker.
The only thing that didn't have any color on it was the shoes that were solid black and the white gloves.
And did you notice anything about the clown's eyes?
I did. That's the most thing I saw was the big brown eyes.
And the clown gets in the car. What kind of car was it?
It was a white LeBaron.
And does the car peel off?
No. It just goes into gear and drives off like nothing happened.
While some of Joe's friends remained at his house waiting for EMS, Joe got into Marlene's car and tried to chase down the clown, but he couldn't catch up. He is seen here back home afterwards, where TV news crews were on the scene. Meanwhile, with the clown's balloons and flowers left behind, Marlene was rushed to the hospital, barely alive, where she was put on life support.
I kept telling her I love her and I don't want her to go and please don't leave me.
2 days later, with no hope of a recovery, life support was removed and Marlene died.
I knew my life was going to change and I knew it was going to become hell because she wasn't here to help me.
A top clue the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office had was Joe's description of the clown. About 6'1", tall, skinny, with orange hair, a red nose, and a big orange smile, and male. And those balloons left behind, they now seemed cruelly mocking. "You're the greatest," one said. The other had a picture of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Authorities had also spoken with Joe's stepfather, Mike Warren, who they learned had an alibi. He was in a car with friends heading to a racetrack when the shooting took place.
Growing up with Mike Warren, what was that like? Was he a good dad?
I thought so. That's the only father I knew. I mean, I was really young when my real father and mother separated.
Marlene and Mike were married when Joe was just 3. They had built a comfortable life in Wellington, Florida, an affluent suburb. Marlene owned several businesses, including apartment complexes, and the couple ran Bargain Motors, specializing in used cars and rentals. While business was good, the marriage, says Joe, was troubled. He says his mother became convinced Mike was having an affair, making her fearful.
She said, if anything does happen to me, your father did it.
She said that to you?
I told her, no way, he would never do anything like that. She said, don't put it past him.
Marlene shared that same fear with her mother, Shirley Twing.
She says, if anything happens to me, Mike did it.
We interviewed Shirley in 2017 when 48 Hours started investigating Marlene's murder.
That's an ominous thing to say. Did you sense fear in her voice?
Sure. Yes, I did.
So when Shirley learned her daughter had been murdered, her mind went to Mike.
Right away. I figured Mike had something to do with it, that's for damn sure.
But Mike had that alibi, so authorities were looking for someone else. And when they visited Bargain Motors, Mike's place of business, one name kept popping up. That woman with whom Mike was supposedly having an affair.
Everybody at the Bargain Motors were reporting that you should look first at Sheila Keen.
Aletha McRoberts, an assistant state attorney in Palm Beach County, has worked on the case from the beginning.
And within the next day or so, tips were being called in that you really should investigate Sheila Keen and Michael Warren.
They were definitely seeing one another.
Della Ward worked at Bargain Motors with Mike Warren.
He had a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, and people just were drawn to him, especially women.
One of those women, Della believed, was Sheila Keen.
I found her very nice, very bubbly. You knew the way she looked at Michael, you loved him, you could see it.
Sheila, who also had a reputation for toughness, was a repo woman, repossessing cars at Bargain Motors.
To do repos, you have to have some kind of guts. She told me, I keep a gun for my protection, because people are crazy what they do.
Sheila told investigators she was out working at the time of Marlene's murder.
She claimed that she was looking for repossession vehicles, but she was unable to provide any address that she went to so that they could follow up and confirm it.
As for the affair, both Sheila and Mike told investigators they were just friends. But that's not what authorities learned when they talked to Sheila's neighbors.
The neighbors at that apartment complex believed that Michael Warren and Sheila Keen were husband and wife.
Is there any doubt in your mind that there was a romantic relationship?
There's no doubt, and they didn't hide it.
An affair, though, isn't necessarily a motive for murder.
Did anyone profit financially from Marlene's death?
Yes. So Michael Warren profited largely. The properties and assets that they owned together were in her name. So by her predeceasing him, he was able to obtain 100% of the assets.
Investigators were also trying to locate local stores that had recently sold clown outfits. Deborah Offord had been working at a costume shop when 2 nights before Marlene's murder, a customer knocked at the door at closing time.
She wanted to see the clown costumes. I said, can you come back tomorrow? And she said, no, I need something right now.
Deborah told investigators the customer paid cash, buying a clown suit, an orange wig, makeup, and a red clown nose.
She was, I would say, about 5'10", long, thick, straight, like chocolate color hair, big brown eyes.
Detectives later presented Deborah with a photo lineup that included a picture of Sheila Keen. Deborah identified Keen and one other woman as possibly being the person who bought the clown costume. The sheriff's office also believed they located where the shooter bought those flowers and balloons. This supermarket.
The buyer described as a white female with dark brown hair.
The description of the customer given by the worker at the supermarket, brown hair, and at the costume store, brown hair, brown eyes, was consistent with Sheila Keen. And there was Sheila's reported affair with Mike Warren. It was intriguing circumstantial evidence, but would it be enough to make an arrest?
Before they turned the machine off on my mother.
God, I wish you could be here with me.
I told her that I loved her very much and that we were going to get justice.
As Joe Aarons mourned the loss of his mother, Marlene, investigators continued looking for additional evidence tying Sheila Keen to Marlene Warren's murder.
You talk about this case to anyone, and the first place people go is, yeah, it's the mistress. So investigators focused on Sheila Keen.
And soon, a big break when detectives located this abandoned white Chrysler LeBaron, matching the description witnesses gave of the getaway car.
What was found inside that Chrysler LeBaron?
There was synthetic fibers, similar type fibers to a clown wig.
They were orange, the same color as the wig Joe Aaron says the assailant was wearing. Also inside the car, they found a human hair. It was brown, like Sheila Keen's.
Sheriff's detectives executed a search warrant at the home of Sheila Keen.
Inside Sheila Keen's closet, detectives say they recovered orange fibers that a forensic examination later concluded were similar to the ones found in the Chrysler LeBaron. And another breakthrough was made when Sheila's hair from her apartment was compared to the one recovered from the getaway car.
That was scientifically, microscopically examined and found to be consistent.
Consistent with Sheila's hair, but DNA technology was still in its infancy in 1990, and scientists were unable to make a definitive connection. There were other challenges for investigators. The gun used to kill Marlene and the actual costume the killer clown wore were never found. And remember, Joe thought the attacker was a 6-foot-tall man. Sheila didn't fit either of those descriptions.
We're talking about an event that took seconds. Glances of this clown was a second or two.
Also, McRoberts says any eyewitness would have a hard time describing someone in a baggy clown costume, makeup, and a wig.
It's basically a clown is a clown.
And there was Sheila's alleged affair with Mike Warren. Those fiber and hair results, and those sales clerks at the costume and grocery stores whose description of the customer purchasing the clown outfit, balloons, and flowers was consistent with Sheila.
This sounds like the evidence is really building up. It's like you've got enough there to make an arrest. What happens?
Well, there was certainly argument about that and opinions that differed at the time. And then there's an indecision about, do I do it now or should we keep trying and get a little bit more?
As investigators looked for more evidence, they discovered that Mike Warren's business, Bargain Motors, was connected to the suspected getaway car. They learned an employee stole the car from a competitor several weeks before the murder.
And that's how they got the Chrysler LeBaron.
Sheriff's detectives spent about 5 hours Thursday night searching the offices of Bargain Motors at...
And as they investigated Mike Warren's business, they discovered widespread fraud, charging him with racketeering, insurance fraud, and odometer tampering. He ultimately was convicted on 43 counts of fraud and sent to prison.
It was for fraud, and so you just can't extrapolate one to the next. I mean, there's no evidence that he's a murderer. We do have our suspicions, though.
He was not charged with any crime in connection with Marlene's murder. And Warren felt he was a victim in this case, sentiments he shared in a radio interview before he went to prison.
They wanted to put me out of business.
Warren speculated that Marlene might actually have been the victim of an angry tenant or car buyer.
I really can't think of a reason why, other than the fact of the type of businesses that we're in, as far as them landlords and crossing a few people by repossessing their car.
But law enforcement did not think Marlene Warren's murder was the work of a disgruntled tenant or customer. And as the years passed, the case grew cold. And as for Sheila Keen, she seemed to disappear.
Nobody ever brought her name up again.
For many years, I was suffering in despair.
After Mike Warren went to prison, Joe says he and his stepfather became estranged. And as he continued to grieve the loss of his mother, he was consumed by her case going unsolved.
And give me a sense of what problems you fell into after your mother's murder.
Wow, where do we start? Alcoholism, drugs, you name it.
It was especially painful, says Joe, on each passing anniversary of the shooting.
I would blow up that day and go get drunk, and just go to her gravesite. It was sad.
Would you go out to her grave to talk to her?
I did, a lot. to try to find answers, but I was so confused. I was getting nothing. I was just lost.
I miss you. I wish you could help me through these hard times.
Joe eventually emerged from the fog of drugs and despair. With that behind him, he became increasingly certain of who murdered his mother.
I concluded that Sheila was the one that did it.
She probably never thought in a million years she'd be held accountable for her crimes. She thought she got away with it.
What do you make of the evidence against Sheila Keen? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
These are paintings that Marlene had painted when she was about 14 years old. I kind of grin because I can almost see her doing this.
Shirley Twing and her daughter Marlene shared a fascination with clowns.
And over here.
In Shirley's home, she even kept a room full of clown art and figurines.
This one says to me, things will get better.
The sad, sometimes unsettling images brought comfort to Shirley, despite the fact that a clown had so brutally ended her daughter's life.
I don't hate clowns. I just hate one.
Although the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office hadn't given up on solving Marlene's murder, 27 long years had passed without an arrest. Then, by 2017, a cold case unit made a breakthrough. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg finally had new, important evidence.
The hairs that were found in the LeBaron were able to be traced to Sheila Keen through DNA technology.
With that new DNA match, detectives believed they could now definitively connect Sheila to the alleged getaway car and to Marlene Warren's murder. And when sheriffs found suspect Sheila Keen, they were blown away to learn whom she had married.
After Michael Warren got out of prison, he reconnected with Sheila Keen. Here's someone whose wife had been murdered, and he just married the chief suspect.
What did that tell you?
When you combine the fact that the two of them were in an affair at the time of the murder, and then later they got married, it did seem like mission accomplished.
That marriage was in 2002. The Warrens, now middle-aged, settled into a new life in Tennessee, running this burger joint called Purple Cow. She took Mike's last name, but in an interesting twist, Assistant State Attorney Aletha McRoberts says she changed her first name.
Sheila Keen-Warren introduced herself to their friends in that life that her name was Debbie. She had dyed her hair blonde, changed her name, and was living a full life.
We would have dinners. They were wonderful cooks.
The Warrens befriended Brooke Blevins.
This is Mike Warren's house.
A neighbor at a weekend property the couple purchased in the Virginia mountains. When we spoke to Brooke in 2018, she said she knew Mike's wife as Debbie and was told it was a childhood nickname.
Her dad nicknamed her that when she was small.
I never called her Sheila. I always called her Debbie.
Former Purple Cow employees Ashley Sexton and Cynthia Swafford say they knew Debbie as a tough boss.
I mean, she was awful aggressive, mean.
And even heard an alarming rumor about her past.
The rumor around Purple Cow when we worked there was Debbie killed Mike's ex-wife. I thought they was blowing off steam. I was like, okay, whatever. But the rumors said it more than once, even to where we knew she dressed up like a clown.
According to an employee, Sheila had appeared in clown makeup at the restaurant one year during Halloween. By the fall of 2017, the Warrens had sold the business and retired full-time to the house in Virginia. Meanwhile, State Attorney Ehrenberg felt the case against Sheila had only gotten stronger.
When you combine the fact that they got married and seemingly lived happily ever after with the new DNA breakthrough, we're able to get enough evidence to make an arrest.
On September 26, 2017, 27 years after Marlene's murder, authorities arrested Sheila Keen-Warren driving on a road near their home. She was charged with first-degree murder.
Sheila did not murder Marlene Warren.
Greg Rosenfeld, Sheila Keen-Warren's defense attorney, says Sheila was not the shooter.
Everything was so methodical. This person walking up to the house, committing this shooting, and then slowly walking away. We're dealing with someone who had experience in committing a hit or a murder.
That's not Sheila.
That is not Sheila.
Shortly after Sheila's arrest, Dave Ehrenberg addressed reporters.
Today, we filed notice of intent to seek the death penalty in this case.
Can you say whether Michael Warren is a suspect?
I can't say that.
Aletha McRoberts says there was something Sheila asked as she was being taken into custody that caught prosecutors' attention.
One of the first things she said is, well, are you going to arrest him too? Pointing to her husband.
Which suggests what to you?
That she knew exactly what she was being arrested for, and they had done it together.
Joe had come to the same conclusion, that his stepfather and Sheila were both involved in his mother's murder.
Would you like to see Mike Warren charged in the murder of your mother?
Yes, I would.
With Sheila in custody, we wanted to speak with Mike Warren.
We're going to go to his front door, give it a knock, and see if he'll answer a couple of questions.
After the arrest of Sheila Keen-Warren in 2017, 48 Hours wanted to talk to Mike Warren about what he knew about his wife's murder.
Here he comes. Hey, Mike. I'm Peter Van Sant with CBS News.
He wouldn't open the door, but we spoke through it for several minutes, competing with a barking dog.
Did you have anything to do with planning the murder of your wife, Marlene? You did not.
He was adamant that neither he nor Sheila Keen-Warren had anything to do with Marlene's murder.
Did you suggest to Sheila that she dress in a clown outfit?
You're saying Sheila. Who said Sheila did that? I don't think she had anything to do with it. If I thought she had something to do with it, I wouldn't have done with it.
Do you believe, based on the evidence over the years, that Mike Warren knew what was going to happen that day?
I don't believe there's any direct evidence of that.
There just wasn't enough evidence to prosecute Michael Warren. But if evidence emerges, we'll pursue it.
As they prepared for trial, despite never recovering the clown disguise or the gun, prosecutors were confident they could prove that Sheila Keen-Warren committed the murder so that she could marry Mike Warren.
Sheila Keen-Warren had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do this.
We will never know who killed Marlene Warren because the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office did such a poor job investigating this case. I can tell you without question that it was not Sheila Keen.
Sheila Keen-Warren's defense attorney, Greg Rosenfeld, says she's innocent, a victim of the state attorney's reckless desire to close a notorious cold case.
And they said, you know what, this is our suspect. We're going to stick with it, even though the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit the puzzle.
Rosenfeld says there were other potential suspects authorities ignored, including an inmate who supposedly bragged in prison about murdering Marlene. But prosecutors say he was investigated and cleared.
It's not surprising that they would try to point the finger at law enforcement for not looking at every potential suspect. But if you look at the evidence, it pointed to one person all along, Sheila Keen-Warren.
The state was confident Sheila Keen-Warren was responsible for Marlene's murder, But Rosenfeld plans to poke holes in its case at trial.
How do you overcome DNA evidence?
The state attorney's office should be embarrassed about the DNA evidence in this case.
Rosenfeld agrees the hair prosecutors say was found in the LeBaron getaway car could be from Sheila Keen-Warren. But he says it could also be from about 4% of the U.S. Caucasian population.
They couldn't exclude Marlene Warren from that hair sample. So that was their groundbreaking DNA evidence.
And if you concede that the hair is from Sheila Keen-Warren, says Rosenfeld, there's an innocent explanation as to how it got there. The LeBaron was on the lot at Bargain Motors where she worked.
Sheila may have been in the car used in this murder. That's it.
The defense attorney says, well, of course her hair might be in there. It doesn't suggest that she was driving at the time of the murder. What do you say to that?
It's just one more link. Once you put that one thing with the totality of all the circumstances, then it starts to become overwhelming.
Rosenfeld says the orange fibers found in the car, which prosecutors say could be from the clown costume, should also be excluded.
So the fibers found in the car were synthetic fibers. That same type of fiber could be used in thousands of different products. So the state likes to present it as clown wig fibers, but that's factually incorrect.
Even more troubling than the evidence gathered, says Rosenfeld, is how it was handled over the decades.
What are we looking at here?
These are evidence bags at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Evidence Unit, torn open. Just gaping holes in these evidence bags.
If there's gaping holes, what can that do to the evidence inside?
That's precisely how you have cross-contamination. Now look at, if I can zoom in here.
This bag contains a clown wig investigators purchased similar to the one they believed was worn by the assailant. They used it to compare to the fibers found in the LeBaron and in Sheila's home.
This is an open evidence bag with the wig sticking out. This is horrifying.
And so your bottom line is that this evidence is unreliable now.
Without question.
Can it not be argued that some of the evidence in this case was indeed bungled?
You know, you're asking a lot of law enforcement to be perfect from 1990 to today. Some of the evidence was kept in an evidence storage area that wasn't ideal. Any mistake, any small opening will be exploited by defense lawyers.
Prosecutors were still certain they had the right person for Marlene's murder. But in February 2020, after a re-evaluation of Sheila Keen-Warren's case, they announced they would no longer seek the death penalty.
Were you told by the prosecutor's office that there was always a chance in a jury trial that she might even be acquitted?
Yes.
See more evidence from the case at 48hours.com.
When you think of your mom today, what do you think about? What images come to mind?
Well, she was robbed, and so was I.
It is said the wheels of justice turn slowly, and when it came to the murder of Marlene Warren, that grind often seemed to come to a halt. After the 27-year wait for an arrest, Sheila Keen-Warren's trial kept getting delayed. By 2022, she had spent 5 years in jail. Her trial postponed 6 times.
And then we had COVID. So it just was one thing after another. Decades of accumulation of files and photographs and mountains of evidence and documents.
Defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld was also trying to work his way through all that evidence. And he says adding to the delays was a lack of cooperation from the state.
Evidence kept, I'd say, disappearing.
Rosenfeld says one crucial piece of evidence for the defense that disappeared for years was what investigators called the clown sighting file.
These were all the tips about people who alleged to have seen clowns in the area.
That opens up for you new avenues as to possible suspects, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the sheriff's office and the state attorney's office just decided they didn't want to look for this evidence.
But then suddenly, in October of 2022, as another trial date neared, the file was found.
It was located not with the Sheila Keen clown murder boxes. It was actually a file out of place.
They find this clown setting file, and there's 35 tips. We begin to investigate them. Now we're 32 years after the murder. You know, we couldn't track down these witnesses.
I've seen it, and it's silly things. Clearly, clown sightings that had nothing to do with Marlene Warren.
And it wasn't being intentionally hidden from the defense, you're saying?
Absolutely not. We were meticulous about making sure they had everything.
Though as the trial neared, the decades of delays were causing problems for the prosecution as well.
Every day that went by, it was a tougher case. Witnesses die, memories fade, evidence spoils. One of our key witnesses passed away. He was the one who compiled the evidence, and without him, we lost a chain of custody for some crucial evidence relating to the fibers.
If I can zoom in here, this is an open evidence bag.
Evidence the defense already claimed had been poorly stored and mishandled.
Contaminated, inadmissible, unreliable. It just goes to show you how poor of an investigation that was done.
They were going to be able to argue that because of the opening of the bags, that the evidence was spoiled, and because of the break in the chain of custody, because of the death of our witnesses, it shouldn't even be admitted. So you had some real potential for reasonable doubt.
There was beyond reasonable doubt.
On April 25th, 2023, 2 weeks before Sheila Keen-Warren's trial for the murder of Marlene Warren was to begin, there was yet another surprise in a case that had been filled with the unexpected. A plea deal was reached.
Ms. Keen-Warren, the defendant herein, will agree to withdraw her previously entered plea of not guilty and her plea of guilty.
Sheila Keen-Warren, whose case at one time included the death penalty, then life in prison, would now plead guilty to second-degree murder and be sentenced to 12 years in prison. Under sentencing guidelines for time served, she is expected to be released in 2025, perhaps sooner.
We had to make a judgment based on what we had.
Because the fear is what, if you take this to trial?
The worst thing that could happen would be that Sheila Keen-Warren would be found not guilty. Not because she was innocent, but because after 33 years, we could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was the one who did it.
But Sheila Keen-Warren did have to publicly pay a price for this plea deal, admitting in open court that she, in fact, did murder Marlene Warren.
If this case were to proceed to jury trial, the state would present evidence that on or about May the 26th of 1990, the defendant was responsible for the death of Marlene Warren.
Ms. Keen-Warren, did you hear all that?
Yes, sir.
And do you agree with that factual basis?
Yes.
Despite admitting her crime, Sheila Keen-Warren, through her attorney, still maintains she is innocent.
Sheila did not commit this murder. It was very difficult for her to admit to committing a crime that she did not commit.
But as a matter of law, she has admitted to committing the murder by saying yes.
Correct, for the purpose of...
So she is a convicted murderer.
Insofar as the law goes, sure. But when you're told you can be home or, you can play Russian roulette and risk spending the rest of your life in prison, it's kind of a no-brainer.
The defense cannot have it both ways. So she will be a murderer for every day for the rest of her life. Even when she gets out of prison one day, she'll still be a convicted murderer.
When she does get out of prison, she will reunite with her husband, Michael Warren.
Sheila's going home to Tennessee. She's going back to her life.
Michael Warren, in a statement provided to 48 Hours regarding the plea, said, "My wife did not commit this crime. It was difficult to see her plea to a crime she did not commit, but it wasn't worth the gamble when she was offered a deal that'll have her home in 16 to 18 months. With this deal, there is a chance that Sheila might get out of prison within the next year or two. Are you all right with that?
Well, I'm not all right with it, but I have to be.
Still, Joe Ahrens approved the plea deal, feeling it wasn't worth the gamble of going to trial.
That was very emotional because that was the end of something so huge that grew for 33 years of my life.
Finally, it's over.
Finally. You know, it was...
The demons that once occupied Joe's mind are gone, replaced with loving memories of how his mother Marlene lived, rather than how that life was so violently taken. What would you say to your mother if you could speak to her today?
Wow, what can I say to my mother? Thank you for showing me how to love and be peaceful, and thank you for being in my life.
Hurts.
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Post-mortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to 48 Hours Post-mortem. I'm CBS News correspondent Anne-Marie Green, and it's time to answer your biggest questions about our latest episode, Murder by Clown. And it's pretty appropriate. It is Halloween. There will be plenty of people knocking on your door dressed in costumes, some of them maybe clowns.
Trick or treat.
I know. So joining me today are 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Sant, who you just heard, and producer Ruth Chenetz, who reported on and produced this episode. Welcome. Will you be opening up your doors and giving out candy this Halloween?
Not to any clowns. I will not, but we're on the slab, ready for the postmortem.
So before we get into postmortem, I want to ask you guys, are you afraid of clowns? Do you like clowns?
I think it really depends what era you are. You know, I grew up with like Bozo and Ronald McDonald, and I think younger people, it's the Joker. So there were clowns at birthday parties when I was a little kid, you know, circuses. I was personally not scared of clowns.
I noticed you looked at me when you said Bozo. I grew up in Seattle, and the most popular show when I was a kid was called J.P. Patches. It was a clown show. So I loved clowns. But then my parents took me down to the annual Seafair Parade, which is a big summer celebration in Seattle. And a clown came over to me. And I have to admit, it freaked me out.
Right?
Particularly in this case, because most of us think you see a clown, it's going to be fun and juggling and happiness. And in this case, just the opposite.
Yeah, I really didn't think about whether or not I was afraid of clowns until I watched this episode. So obviously there's a lot to talk about with this case. It took nearly 30 years before we even saw an arrest. And it involves a killer clown, a clown or somebody in a clown costume. It's pretty much unforgettable. I want to just take a listen to an overview of this episode.
The evil clowns you see in the movies, well, it came to life in this case.
The 1990 murder of Marlene Warren, shot by someone dressed as a clown, haunted the public, as well as the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office, now headed by Dave Ehrenberg, as the case went unsolved for decades.
The unknowingness of this heinous crime, it was hell.
Joe Ahrens was 21 when on May 26, 1990, he was at home with his mother, Marlene Warren, when they saw a clown approaching, carrying balloons and flowers.
My mother opened the door, and I heard bang. And I saw that she'd been shot in the face.
What does the clown do?
Calmly walks right back to the car.
Investigators immediately learned Marlene's husband, Michael Warren, was believed to be having an affair with a woman named Sheila Keen.
The suspects became clear it was Sheila Keen and was Michael Warren, but Michael Warren had an alibi.
Sheila Keen's alibi could not be verified, but despite quickly identifying a suspect, it would take decades to sort out the case and make an arrest.
And I don't know about you guys, but if a clown just sort of showed up at my door, I don't think I would open the door.
Well, this one, the victim's son was recovering from a broken leg, and the clown was carrying balloons and flowers. So they're thinking, oh, perhaps someone's sending a get well gift. Isn't this nice? And they saw the reflection through the door as they got there, and then things went sour.
And you got to remember, too, the time period. You know, this murder was back in 1990, and they had all these companies back then that people hired to come over and sing happy birthday and stuff. I'm telling you, I would have opened that door. And remember Marlene's last words. She opens the door and says, "Oh, how pretty."
Oh my goodness. And the description that her son gave was of a pretty tall man, is what he thought.
Well, think of someone in a clown outfit. If you have a clown wig on and you have clown makeup, it's in some ways quite a brilliant disguise if you want to commit a crime.
Really? I was also struck by the fact that this victim loved clowns. And I thought, was this on purpose?
Marlene Warren loved clowns, and that maybe a clown outfit would be a good disguise to get her to open the door. I mean, all of these things swirl around, and they were swirling around back in 1990, and yet no arrest was made. And it's still, to this day, just for me, just based on my professional experience on 48 Hours for several decades, I've seen a lot of cases go to court with much less circumstantial evidence than this one had. But back in the day, they said, we don't got enough yet.
I want to play some sound from the episode.
These are paintings that Marlene had painted when she was about 14 years old. I kind of grin because I can almost see her doing this.
Shirley Twing and her daughter Marlene shared a fascination with clowns.
And over here.
In Shirley's home, she even kept a room full of clown art and figurines.
This one says to me, things will get better.
The sad, sometimes unsettling images brought comfort to Shirley, despite the fact that a clown had so brutally ended her daughter's life.
Yeah, and she said she still likes clowns.
She said, I don't hate clowns, I just hate one after that.
You've been covering the story since 2017. I'm just curious about sort of how you got onto it and what kept you on it.
When I first heard that our research department was looking into a case involving a clown who came to the front door with flowers and balloons, this is an irresistible story because I thought, what a brilliant scheme to get someone to open the door. And then, of course, you also wanted to know, what's the backstory on all of this? Why a clown? Why out in this, upscale neighborhood in Wellington, Florida, a family that seemed to have it all, right? Successful. Her husband had Bargain Motors, a car dealership. They owned some real estate investments. So I found the story irresistible, and I really did believe that if I find it irresistible, I figured a lot of other people would too. I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up, right?
That's so true, Ruth.
Well, I mean, we do plenty of spousal stories, but you're going to remember a clown.
Yeah.
That's, people could be like, oh, yeah, have I seen this one about the husband and the wife or the girlfriend? But a clown, I mean, people just don't think about a clown coming up and doing this. And this was a woman who did not seem to have enemies. As they dug deeper, there were people saying, oh, their marriage did have problems. But that was the inner circle. The vast, the wider group of people weren't aware of the marriage having problems. But, this was a case filled with the unexpected, starting with a clown murdering someone. I don't know that I've ever worked on a story where one of the pieces of evidence is a clown sighting file that the police were collecting.
My goodness.
People calling with tips. Wait, because this was a huge story. You can imagine, especially back then when murders weren't as common, and it's in this wealthy community and it's a clown. And so citizens are calling saying, hey, I saw a clown by the car dealership. I saw a clown here. So, I can't think of any other story where there was a clown sighting file that the police were keeping.
Right. Yeah. For years.
And the fact that it had been 30 years meant that, memories were fading. But Marlene...
Lives were ending.
Lives were ending.
The lead detective died. That makes it very difficult to be able to put together a coherent case if you're lead investigator who can take you through the entire progression of this case passes away. I mean, they had enormous obstacles in this case.
Marlene's son, his memory, I'm sure, was incredibly still vivid.
Absolutely. Joe Aarons, he breaks my heart. I felt like we had a great connection. All of us on the team had a great connection with Joe. He just has this enormous heart. He went through hell. Imagine he's sitting at a breakfast table, right? And his mom opens the door. Oh, how pretty. He hears this sound. I think he thought maybe it was a balloon. One of the balloons had popped or something. And he goes over there and finds his mother's been shot in the face with a .38 caliber bullet. And she's on the ground, struggling to survive, struggling to breathe. And this poor boy, he was 21 years old. He was learning how to fly. He had dreams of becoming an airline pilot. And so he had everything going for him. And after his mother's murder, he fell into despair, and he fell into, which he talks openly about, drugs, alcohol, and his life just went completely off the rails. And just as the investigation did this journey for 3 decades, his journey, he got back on the rails. And he ends up being such a powerful voice in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And he chased after the clown.
I was just going to ask you that question, because it was sort of unclear whether or not anyone went after the clown, because the image that I get is this clown walking away very slowly.
Why would the clown, having shot Marlene, not turn and run to the car?
Right.
Well, why? Because that clown perhaps knew that son Joe had a cast on. He had a broken leg and couldn't run after him. To me, that was always part of these circumstances. Like, how would this person have known that Marlene was fascinated with clowns? Who could have told her that? Why would the shooter turn and walk away, if not because that killer knew the son had a leg in a cast?
Marlene did not die immediately. So first he would call 911, and he had some friends over, and then he got into his mom's car and took off after the clown, but did not get anywhere near it.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't catch up.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what Marlene's son said about their marriage. Maybe it was rocky, but was it violent?
He did not think that, although he was surprised that one time his mom said, if anything should happen to me, your father did it. And he said, oh, come on. And she was like, no, I'm serious. But he really didn't believe it. This was a man who raised him from when he was a little child and really was the only father he knew. And so it wasn't that Marlene was saying this constantly. He wasn't really noticing bickering. He was noticing his father not spending as much time at the house, but it wasn't one of these growing up where my parents are screaming and fighting and throwing things, which is why when his mother even said this to him, he was sort of dismissive of, oh, come on, you can't be serious.
And keep in mind that Marlene had said that to her mother, Shirley, the same thing. If something ever happens to me, Mike did it.
One of the really sort of interesting components of this hour is seeing you, Peter, stop to talk to Mike by his home after Sheila's arrest in 2017 for an interview. I want to play some of that sound.
Hey, Mike. I'm Peter Van Sant with CBS News.
He wouldn't open the door, but we spoke through it for several minutes, competing with a barking dog.
Did you have anything to do with planning the murder of your wife, Marlene? You did not.
He was adamant that neither he nor Sheila Keen-Warren had anything to do with Marlene's murder.
Did you suggest to Sheila that she dress in a clown outfit?
You're saying, Sheila, who said Sheila did that? I don't think she had anything to do with it. If I thought she had something to do with it, I wouldn't have done with it.
Peter, you're sort of known, in your episodes for walking right up to someone, asking them those direct questions. I'm curious about kind of your approach. I mean, you must have been shocked that he even came to the door.
I was surprised that he came to the door, but I was more upset that we had a barking dog in the background and we were trapped. I mean, we had to get this thing done at that moment, and we approached and that dog just barked and barked. I prefer to do approaches when people are in public spaces, like a parking lot of a grocery store. We'd done some staking out back in the day and some hours hoping that he would come out, because that's the best place to capture someone. When they're in their own home, you never know if he owns a firearm. I'm on his property. I just don't like doing them at people's homes, but we ended up knocking on the door, and it's unsatisfying because you don't get to look him in the eyes and you don't get to really challenge him. But we wanted to at least give him some opportunity, and at least he denied it and said he had no role in this.
But I do want to say one thing about Peter, because this is the joke in the office, is if Peter shows up at your front door, you're in trouble.
I'll keep that in mind. Don't tell Peter where I live. Were there any questions that you were able to ask him, but it was sort of unusable for the episode?
Well, over the course of 7 minutes, because you couldn't understand much of what he had to say.
Yeah.
But there are things that to this day, I'd love to sit down and interview him. And everyone has to keep in mind, Mike Warren has never been charged with a crime in this case. He never has. Prosecutors even today, and they told us in the interview, they believe he was involved. And we're not saying that he did do this. We're just saying there are circumstances that we would like to get clarified with him. In the prosecution has said, if we get new information, because there's no statute of limitation on murder, they would move against Mike Warren, but they have not been able to clear that hurdle.
Mike Warren had an alibi for the time of the murder. He was in a car with several friends heading to a racetrack. It took them so long to bring the circumstantial case against Sheila. And the thing we should point out is by the time Peter went to the door, they were married. So in the beginning of the story, they're having an affair. And that is one of the things that made the case stronger to them is, they're married. But you want to give someone a chance to respond.
Yeah.
Because the viewer at home might be wondering, did he have anything to do with this? And at least other than saying prosecution never had a strong enough case, he had an alibi, you can hear it from himself.
And you can tell I'm driven nuts by this case to this day, because it was just 3 hours after the shooting. There's an anonymous tip to police. Look at Mike Warren, Sheila Keen. They're having an affair. Mike told police that he wasn't having an affair with Sheila. And then in 2002, the two of them get married.
Coincidence?
And then she changes her first name to Debbie, at least socially changes it to Debbie.
Which she claims is a childhood nickname.
You look at motive. If there was a love triangle, that's one of the classic motives for murder. Financial gain. Who gained from her death? Mike Warren. You may have seen the house I approach him in was a beautiful palatial mansion. And then the circumstances of where they went through their lives. She was known to carry a .38 caliber gun when she worked as a person who had to repossess cars.
Right.
The victim was shot with a .38 caliber bullet. That gun was never recovered. And they're frustrated as can be, the prosecutors today.
So when we get back, we're going to talk about evidence, the clown costume, hair fibers, the getaway car, that made it seem like Sheila was the obvious suspect until it was discovered that some evidence had been mishandled. Would that create enough reasonable doubt to exonerate her? Well, we're going to get into all of that and more when we come back. So welcome back. Let us talk about Sheila and the evidence that pointed to her involvement in Marlene's murder. There was evidence that suggested that a female with brown hair had been to a costume store to purchase a clown costume. Let's play a little clip from the episode where we hear from the costume store clerk.
She wanted to see the clown costumes. I said, can you come back tomorrow? And she said, no, I need something right now.
I mean, come on.
I don't think it was end of circus sale days or something.
Right. I mean, why do you need a clown costume right now?
Right.
So investigators went looking, as opposed to canvassing gun stores like one does in other murder stories, they canvassed costume stores and said, did anyone in these past few days fitting this description come in? And this one store said yes. Again, it was tough for investigators because Joe Aarons and some of his friends who saw the clown gave different descriptions of the costume. But if you think about, you see a clown costume, are you really noticing, is it pink? Is it orange?
No.
Is it diamonds? Is it circles? So instead of a description of the clown costume, it was a description of the customer. Brown hair, brown eyes. And Sheila Keen had brown hair and brown eyes. And as you said, somebody coming in closing time, it's in a rush. They paid by cash, so it's not that somebody could go back and check. And that was one of the pieces of evidence that they held on to. But they never found the original clown wig, clown costume.
Mm-hmm.
They never found that.
And remember, this is back in 1990. Today, if this had happened, that shop would undoubtedly have a security camera inside.
That's what I was going to ask about.
And
I mean, it's 1990, but it's not like 1960. I mean, you would think that maybe there would have been something, but I guess there wasn't.
No. But there were other things, though, that implicated Sheila Keen. The Chrysler LeBaron that the shooter drove off was finally discovered. And authorities, when they checked the inside of that car, they found this synthetic fiber that the clown was wearing, right? And then inside Sheila Keen's apartment, they found another trace of that fiber. But you know, when we talked to the defense attorney, they said, well, that kind of fiber is used in various other things, and you can't say definitively that was from a clown wig.
Right.
But, you know, I'm sure, Anne-Marie, at your apartment, like in my house, you know, we have your house, you have
oh, yes.
These fibers, these orange fibers all over the place.
All over the place.
See, this is part of what drives me nuts
Yeah.
about this case, because again, it's circumstantial, but it's another piece.
Because it's not just about the single fiber. It's about all of this stuff that is so out of the ordinary.
Exactly. And there was a brown hair found in the Chrysler LeBaron. Now, remember, Sheila was a repo woman. This car came from the car dealership. They obviously took a sample of Sheila's hair, and back then they didn't have exacting DNA and it was similar. But even if it had been Sheila's hair, there was a possible explanation. She was driving, you know, the car for business. And we should point out, Sheila said that she was out working, repossessing cars at the time of the murder. And prosecutors could not verify that. And she's, well, you know, if you're repossessing cars, you're hardly out knocking on people's door, doing it in a very public way. But that was when you talk about all the things adding up.
Yeah.
And remember, too, the Chrysler LeBaron was a vehicle that had been reported stolen. And yet her hair fiber is inside that car. And if you're plotting a murder and you need a getaway vehicle, do you use a stolen car so that you don't have to use one of your vehicles?
Right.
The icing on the cake was when they got married. And the other part was there was a newly formed cold case unit. And we find that a lot. A lot of these cases linger and linger because they're too busy. And then a cold case unit comes in and opens up files and starts looking at things.
And a lot of that has to do with the evolution of DNA evidence, that now people can crack open these evidence files again because the testing is available. Except with this evidence file, as decades go on, there's components of it that people can't find. I mean, they treated the evidence badly.
It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It does this create reasonable doubt to the reliability of their DNA evidence? You know, it was 27 years later they felt they had this match and they thought, oh boy, we really now have got Sheila, but then they discover how this evidence had been kept, and some of these bags had actually torn open, were exposed. It was terrible.
Peter, let's play some of that sound.
What are we looking at here?
These are evidence bags at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Evidence Unit, torn open. Just gaping holes in these evidence bags.
If there's gaping holes, what can that do to the evidence inside?
That's precisely how you have cross-contamination.
So I have sort of a twofold question for you guys. Ruth, what is the risk of presenting evidence like this? But I also want to know, how often do you see cases like this where the evidence is treated in such a sort of cavalier manner?
I think this one was particularly, and they say, Peter asked the state attorney, he says, gee, you're asking a lot of police to be perfect and locations move and evidence rooms move.
Yes. Yes. Is that too much to ask?
But all it takes is one juror. And I'm sure, the defense attorney would have held up the bag and said, look, if this is how they handled this, how can you trust anything in this case?
Yeah.
So you just need one juror to say, gee, that's a good point.
And remember,
I don't know.
Remember, jurors look for what they call a CSI moment in any case.
Yeah.
And at one point, they had a CSI moment. But now with these torn bags, I swear, I think I could have, on cross, undermined the reliability of that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They were in a terrible bind there. And so that's when I think the prosecution team said, we are in deep doo-doo, and let's get a plea deal.
But I think also the prosecution, they still were steadfast in they had the right person. It was whether they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And they didn't want to roll the dice, and it was important to them that she plead guilty.
Let's talk about this plea deal. Sheila takes the plea deal, which means that she changed her not guilty plea to a guilty one. But Peter, I was particularly struck by your exchange with the defense attorney. I want to play some of that.
Sheila did not commit this murder. It was very difficult for her to admit to committing a crime that she did not commit.
But as a matter of law, she has admitted to committing the murder by saying yes.
Correct, for the purpose of...
So she is a convicted murderer.
Insofar as the law goes, sure. But when you're told you can be home, or, you can play Russian roulette and risk spending the rest of your life in prison, it's kind of a no-brainer.
I don't know. Is it a no-brainer? We talked about the fact that we're dealing with a lot of circumstantial evidence, that the evidence that had been retained, there were problems with the way it was preserved or not preserved. It's 30 years later. People have crappy memories or are not around anymore. I don't know if it's quite a no-brainer to admit to killing someone.
Right. And if you are innocent, would you ever admit to a murder you did not commit? And all of the ramifications that will have for you the rest of your life. I understand what the defense attorney was saying, his argument, and I'm sure he talked to his client with that. But my point in driving that home, and the point that for Joe Aarons has given him some peace, is that she admitted in open court that she had committed the murder. And it ties all of these circumstantial pieces together. And for Joe, it does make that puzzle fit. And so he has that satisfaction. And he went out to his mom's grave and he said, we did it. We finally got justice, even though she's only going to be in prison. And this is still in dispute. She may be getting out as early as
2025, or it could be sooner. She was sentenced to 12 years, but it's something called gain time. It's a formula for time served. Mm-hmm. So while it's a 12-year sentence, every month she's there, she gets time taken off. So it's 2025, perhaps sooner. And we did get a statement from Mike Warren about this, where he said, regarding the plea, my wife did not commit this crime. It's difficult to see her plea to a crime she did not commit, but it was not worth the gamble when she was offered a deal that will have her home in 16 to 18 months.
I got to tell you, I didn't know how I felt about the way this ended. Because usually when you have a case that sort of drags on for decades, there's some satisfaction when, the guilty party has to pay the price, where there's justice. And even though she agreed to this plea deal, somehow it didn't feel as satisfying.
It's just a bizarre ending. The circle hasn't been closed in this case.
That's it for this week's Postmortem. Peter, Ruth, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for letting us tell the story.
It's been great, Anne-Marie.
It has been great. Listen, everyone, be sure to join us next Tuesday for another Postmortem. Watch 48 Hours Saturdays at 10, 9 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. And be sure to follow 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen ad-free on the Amazon Music or Wondery app.